pre-lunch break. It is March 12th, and we are starting at about 12:01. I'm Catherine Johns from the Greensboro History Museum. I am the tour coordinator and resource specialist for the Education Department. And today we're going to be talking about the Battle of Guilford Courthouse. My special guest today is Ranger Rebecca Barefoot from Guilford Courthouse National Military Park. Welcome, Rebecca.
Well, thank you for having me, Catherine. It's exciting to be on this program and share what we're going to be doing for our 240th anniversary of the Battle of Guilford Courthouse.
Woo! So first, let's get some basics out of the way. Ranger Rebecca, what are you a ranger of?
So I am a National Park Service ranger. So if you've ever seen this arrowhead around Greensboro, and maybe you haven't visited a lot of national parks, well, I'm here to tell you that you have that opportunity in your backyard. Most of you probably know the name of our park by Battleground Park. That is the colloquial name, but our name is Guilford Courthouse National Military Park. And we ourselves are the first Revolutionary War battlefield that was preserved by Congress. So we're one of the older national parks. And while we might not sound like the crown jewels out west, we are part of the Southern Campaign area here in the Southeast, even though we ourselves are an individual park, talking about the Revolutionary War.
Absolutely. So next, what does Guilford Courthouse National Military Park honor?
Great question. So 240 years ago, on March 15th, the Ides of March, there was the Battle of Guilford Courthouse. That is actually the largest battle of the Southern Campaign of the American Revolution. And a lot of people aren't familiar with the Southern Campaign. Basically, it culminates an effort between Lord Charles Cornwallis. He was pursuing Major General Nathaniel Greene, who you see behind Catherine's head. Greene's army was moving between the Carolinas and Virginia, waiting for the opportune moment to attack Lord Cornwallis's crown forces. So this park protects the area of most of the battlefield, and we are talking about the Continental Army, the militia, as well as the British perspective. There are 29 monuments that were created by the original Guilford Battleground Company that saved half of the battlefield, you could say. And we try to tell both sides of the narrative because we want to help people understand the complexity of war and the people who are involved in it.
There we go. Give me 1 second. Rebecca, I'm so sorry. I am getting your PowerPoint up right now so we can show exactly about where the battle occurred. The PowerPoint, as PowerPoints are wont to do, glitched out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And many of you have probably been to our park before and are familiar with the Nathaniel Greene Monument as well as the other 28 monuments that are on the site. And our visitor center is actually located between the first and second line. Let's see, here we go. These are two historic maps that we like to show at the park. People usually don't see the map on the left. That was created by a British field engineer. His name is Henry Haldane. And he went around the battlefield after the battle took place to record how the soldiers fought, which is a common occurrence in wartime so that commanders can understand what happened as well as they report that higher up the chain. To the right, the yellow map and the more refined version is what we typically show at our visitor center. This was taken from Henry Haldane and published by Lieutenant Colonel Bannister Tarleton. And later on, the red and the blue were emphasized to show the battle movements. So a lot has changed with the landscape over time. For example, you see two large patches of open fields. Not the same as it used to be, but if you come to the park and you're wondering why is this battlefield a forest, because usually you think of them as an empty space, there is a unique reason why General Greene chose this area. New Garden Road, which you may drive down many times a day, there's a historic part of it that's preserved. That was a great way for an army to be moved and maneuvered through an area. It was a perfect place to put cannons. And General Greene chose this forested environment around the courthouse to draw in the British Army so that his soldiers could have a better opportunity to fight them and scatter their forces. And when did this, even more at our museum.
And when did this battle occur?
On March 15th, 1781. So it's at the tail end of the Southern campaign of the American Revolution, and the events that happened here are going to ultimately lead to the siege at Yorktown. All righty.
So Rebecca, because of COVID, which has upended a lot of our lives, how is Guilford Courthouse National Military Park going to observe the anniversary of the battle this year?
So we have moved, like many institutions, a lot of our programming online. We deal a lot with we offer a lot of interpretation on our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter page. As you can see on the left, we have been doing these on this date posts. So every day for about a month or so, we've been taking visitors through the primary sources to tell them how General Greene and Lord Cornwallis are coming together into this crucial moment, whether that's pursuing one another in the Carolinas, the race to the Dan River, and many other events. And it's letting us explore other commanders as well as the experiences of militiamen and lower ranking soldiers. We've also put out a new virtual tour series that you'll be able to see on our YouTube page. And we also have cell phone tours. But we are going to be continuing this digital outreach on our new YouTube page, which I think is our next slide, Catherine. Yes. So typically we have author talks in the evening. Some of you in the audience may have been to those. And due to COVID restrictions, we're not able to do that. So we're taking a new approach where two park rangers have interviewed two historians to talk about their books, which is going to be pretty fun. And as you can see on the screen, we are going to be releasing these on our YouTube pages on the 13th, the 14th, and 15th. That way you can just kind of experience the history of the battle throughout the weekend.
And I believe that we are going to actually have some short video clips of those presentations.
Yes, I think the first one is going to be called A Good Salading, and that's with Ranger Abby, where she's talking about colonial foodways that would have occurred during this time. And she's actually giving you an opportunity to learn a recipe that you can do at home.
Good morning, I'm Ranger Abby. As we honor the 240th anniversary of the Battle of Guilford Courthouse, I would like to welcome you all to the Hoskins farm site. For the years prior and the generations following the American Revolution, this was a place where a colonial American family lived, worked, played, and grew. But on the morning of March 15, 1781, these grounds became the starting point for the largest battle in the Southern campaign in America's fight for independence. A key component of colonial life, as well as for soldiers surviving on campaign, was the existence of the kitchen garden. Here, a family grew the year-round staples that kept the household fed. Now, what exactly could be found in the garden depended on the season, as crops were rotated out based on how well they could survive in the current climate. The southern colonies would have had a few earlier growing opportunities than their northern counterparts, but the number of foodstuffs available in mid-March would still have been limited, both for colonists and soldiers struggling to survive on campaign.
Okay, so that's a good snippet.
It is, and that is one of my favorite topics from the national park, is talking about cooking. That is outstanding.
And I tried some of that salad oil and it was pretty good.
It was. So. I have to say also, from my time in the national park, one of my most ridiculous but for some reason, significant disappointments was when someone stole the pumpkin out of our vegetable garden.
Oh, yes.
That broke my heart into
Yeah.
a million little pieces.
Yeah.
We were waiting so long.
But we have, so the 2 author tours I talked about, I can give y'all a little snippet into that. The first one that's going to be released is Ranger Kate McDonald interviewed John Knight. He's an English historian, and he wrote the book War at Sabre Point, Bannister Tarleton and the British Legion. So many of you have probably heard the name Tarleton. He has a pretty bad reputation with early historians. And Ranger Kate discusses with John Knight about how the author re-examined these early interpretations to see what is really Tarleton's supposed bloodthirsty nature. So how was he really? And you're also going to learn about who the British Legion was and where they were born, what are their actions in battle. Interestingly, a lot of Tarleton's British Legion were actually born here in the American colonies. And our other interview is Ranger Jason Baum. He interviewed John Moss about his new book on the Battle of Guilford Courthouse, which we're about to see. And he's talking to John Moss about the myths that the author encountered and the hurdles he overcame while he was sifting through so many accounts of this event.
What to you is the most important point in the battle, or the most important factor, the most important person? What to you is the tipping point that leads it to be a British Pyrrhic victory as opposed to a total British victory or an American victory?
Well, I would say Greene's decision to pull back to Speedwell Ironworks on Troublesome Creek, that really, I think, was the moment where the British had to win. Most of his army was intact, and decided we are going to live to fight another day. And I think that decision was very mature. It showed that he was an experienced veteran. Would Anthony Wayne have done the same thing? I don't know. Would Lafayette have done the same thing? I would definitely say no.
That's really telling about the knowledge that General Greene had. He is, of course, really well known also for being very patient with the movements and very steady about things that are going to happen. It saved a lot of lives, didn't it?
It did. And just having to balance the logistics of war, feeding, clothing your army, constantly staying out of sight, out of reach of the enemy, working with locals, trying to establish those relationships so that you can depend on those locals for food supply. It's a very calculated time, and Greene definitely had that ability to be calculated, to work with others. So we even see him reach out to the local Moravians and Quakers requesting their assistance, and having to work with the fact that these groups of people don't want to be involved in warfare.
Absolutely. I think his time as the quartermaster probably helped with a good bit of
It
that.
did. Yes, it did, for sure.
Let me pull our PowerPoint back up for us.
So there's going to be a lot of videos, and those were some great introductions into what we'll have. And our YouTube page, you just have to look up Guilford NPS, and I think that's actually on the next PowerPoint. Yes. Yeah. So look up Guilford NPS. Feel free to subscribe to our channel, and then you'll get notifications when those videos come online. But as you can see, we already have some of our virtual tour videos loaded, as well as our park film and other such victories, since we're currently not able to show that in the visitor center.
Absolutely. So what, Ranger Barefoot, might be something that people are not going to fully understand about the battle when they come and just have a casual visit at the National Military Park?
That's a great question. So there are a lot of people involved or who were affected by the battle. And sometimes their historic record doesn't always make it into museum exhibits. So we use these opportunities to really explore. So what you're looking at on the screen is a hand-drawn map, and you'll see it says a 10-year-old's perspective. This map was drawn by a young 10-year-old named Jonathan Jessup. He's a Quaker who lived in the New Garden Friends community. And this is a map that he drew of this Battle of New Garden, which comes right before the Battle of Guilford Courthouse. To the left, you'll see a watercolor that's part of our collection by Don Troiani depicting that battle. It is entirely possible that Bannister Tarleton lost 2 fingers at that battle. It's either at New Garden or here at Guilford Courthouse. The record is not entirely sure. But I just wanted to take this opportunity to talk about looking at history from a child's perspective, something that isn't always available or isn't always taken as seriously. So if, Catherine, you could kind of circle around where it says American line, British line, and you see the house that says Thomas Jessup, that's Jonathan's father. It's most likely that the family hid in their house during the battle. So I'd like for you to just take a second to imagine you hiding in your home and hearing gunfire around you. Pretty terrifying experience. So he drew out a map of his community, which I think shows a really interesting perspective into a child's mind, that he's able to plot where everybody in his community lives. And whether or not the perspective is perfect, he is showing how the American lines would have interacted with the British lines, the picket skirmish, and he's able to understand the army moving to the location of our park today, moving towards the courthouse area. And it's just so interesting that this had such an impression on a child to be able to draw this map. I think it's a pretty critical resource to consider.
First off, I'm so impressed that this 10-year-old has better handwriting than most of us. Yes. And I am also incredibly impressed about his spatial analysis. I do want to point out, can you tell us what the Great Salisbury Road is?
Yes, the Great Salisbury Road is a colonial highway that has the other name of the New Garden Road. So that is a colonial highway that still exists within the park. We call it Historic New Garden Road, but Ranger Jason and I have looked at some map overlays with historic ones, and the shape and structure of New Garden Road as it is today, if you go through the Brassfield region, cross over Battleground, is still pretty much the same layout. And as I like to let our students know when they come to visit the park, the cannons that would have been used, artillery guns, could shoot a fair distance and probably reach the area of the movie theater, if certainly not could take out the gas station if they were sitting on the front line.
And one more little question. You said that this happened shortly before. How shortly before does the Battle of New Garden happen before the Battle of Guilford Courthouse?
Oh, like within less than 2 hours. So within a very short amount of time, because Greene is using Henry Lee as to kind of pull the British Army in, because you just basically, I mean, it's not a straight road as Jessup depicts it, but it's the main highway. So he can use that system. Again, that's one of the reasons why he sculpts the battlefield area in a way. He puts his army in a certain way to take advantage of that road.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So we have some depictions of what some of the participants of Guilford Courthouse National Military Park's battle was like. Yes,
this is images of the North Carolina militia. So the militia are distinguished by the outfits that they wear. When you serve in the militia, you don't have a continental uniform. So you're not in what people traditionally think of the blue uniform. You're wearing your pretty much everyday clothes. So we recently were reading a researcher, Douglas Dorney, who surveyed pensions from North Carolina militia members, he found that the average age at Guilford Courthouse was 24 years old, but the range was between 14 to 59. And apparently, he discovered that Guilford Courthouse is the most cited battle in pension applications, makes up for 31%. So on average, militiamen do about 2 tours of service and serve between 6 to 11 months. Most of their service would be between 1780 and 1781. And that's when the British Army was present here in the South. There's 3 ways that men can enter the militia. You can volunteer, you can substitute for somebody else, or you could be drafted. And there were men who made significant amounts of money by volunteering to be a substitute, but at least 50% of men were drafted into service at least once. But here's an interesting thing. If you've been to the park or you're going to come visit us this weekend, you'll learn that many of the men on the first line ran after firing their shots. But those who evade duty and are later caught will get fines or have their property confiscated. And deserting the Army before your discharge can lead to forced service in the Continental Line. And that happened to a lot of militiamen. So while you would have recently only served maybe a few months, now you're pressed into potentially a few years.
So we have a depiction, I'm going to circle him right here. This is probably what most people usually think a Revolutionary War soldier looked like. This gentleman here in the blue coat,
with the
almost
red
continental looking, although I can't see the full garment to see if it is. But you're telling us that these gentlemen were actually what was more common. Are there any other things that might have been that we would not usually think of as a Revolutionary War soldier?
That's a good question. So would you like to go on to the Virginia militia?
Sure, we can go to Virginia.
Yes. Okay. So the Virginia militia would probably be in similar uniforms. Now, I'd like for y'all to notice that you'll still see like a blue continental uniform. Keep in mind that these are artistic depictions of the battle, and that during the battle, you did have veterans on the second line with the Virginia militia. So you had people who had continental experience. Now, the second line is towards the middle of the park. It's actually located behind the General Greene monument when you come to the park. But I wanted to give y'all kind of a quick idea of one particular Virginia militiaman named Samuel Houston. Now, some of you might be like, oh, the person from the Texas Revolution. Not the same, but they're actually related. This Samuel Houston, and this is a quote from his experience at the battle here on the screen. He was 23 years old and he was trying to study to become a minister, but he was called into militia service in Virginia. And he makes his way here down to Guilford Courthouse. This quote that's on the screen is about his experience in the second line. He fought under General Edward Stevens, and they were drawn into a separate fight on the battlefield. And this is why I encourage people to actually come visit us at the park so we can give you an idea of where these happened. He and his group actually came across the Hessians, who we have above. And this is a really interesting case of mistaken identity, because as we were just talking about uniforms, what color are those Hessians wearing, Catherine?
They are blue.
So somebody's untrained eye, a militiaman who may not have interacted with Continental soldiers, would have thought, that looks like somebody who's on my side. And as you can see at the end of the quote, Samuel Houston's friends, they shouted "Liberty, liberty" to these Hessians, thinking they were Americans, and then were fired upon.
Yes.
So not the best.
Easy to miss those very unique pointed hats that the Hessians were wearing sometimes.
It is. And I always find it interesting that those are able to stay on in combat, but they were, I've been told they fit very snugly. But I'd like to give a little bit of information about the Hessians, because a lot of people don't really know much about them. A lot of people, when they mention Hessians, think about this idea that they might have been mercenaries, but that's not actually the case. in the sense that they were soldiers of fortune. They did not individually, as soldiers, sell their service to the highest bidder. What you see is a depiction of the Regiment von Boves from the time period. They come from a place called Hesse Castle, which was a mercenary state, and their king collected payments for the entire military service, the entire group. And if you think serving in the militia for a few months is burdensome, the Hessians had to serve for 24 years. So I would like for you all to reflect on 24 years of your life and imagine that in service. A lot of the Hessians actually didn't really agree with what was happening in the American Revolution. And they came from a place where, you know, it was very difficult to buy land. They didn't have that kind of wealth. And then they see it here available in this new country, and many of them actually desert their army. There was a total of 18,970 Hessians that came to America, and 3,000 went unaccounted for. There were opportunities for them to meet German-speaking communities and to kind of integrate into that.
So we have we've actually seen quite a few depictions of what some Revolutionary War soldiers looked like.
Yes.
What do you think people need to know about what a revolutionary soldier would really have looked like?
That's a great question. So a lot of the artwork that you see of American Revolution soldiers, a lot of movie depictions typically depict white men serving, but that doesn't really show the whole picture. In fact, there are about 5,000 African Americans who served in the entire Continental Army, and twice as many fought for the British. And the American Revolution is actually the time of the first integrated army, but that's not something you see until 1948 again. Now, of course, we do have service members who are African American between that time, but the fact that you see in the American Revolution whites and blacks fighting at the same time does not happen again until World War II. Now, we do have African Americans who fought at the Battle of Guilford Courthouse. It is difficult to do research on African American participants. Now, there are very helpful books that we have in our library and that can be accessed online. It's just that the records are very difficult to mine because we have to depend on a white court's perspective and their descriptions or other battle descriptions of these individuals. One I would like to talk about is Thomas Carney. He's a Maryland Continental soldier. And he is described by a very detailed obituary years later. He was described as being very brave. He bore a conspicuous part of a soldier and often persisted that when the Maryland troops came to a charge at the third line, he bayoneted 7 of the enemy. And at another battle, he actually saved the life of his commander who was on the field. Another man who fought at the battle, William Cough, he was a free man of color, but he was likely 14 or 15 years old, a young adult when he fought at this battle. He was with the Virginia Militia on the second line. And when he wasn't in battle, he was assisting with slaughtering and butchering meat for the regiment's meals. And we find him in pension applications years later because he suffered a war injury that fractured his leg. So while he was able to go on and have a farm, he eventually was not able to work because of his war wound and needed that assistance. So some of you might wonder, you know, why do we see African Americans in the American Revolution? We know from later history events that with the American Revolution, enslaved persons were not freed, that there's those big questions about what did, you know, the Declaration of Independence mean to the Black population. So you see either free men of color participating on their own free will to do so, or you see substitution that brings enslaved men onto the battlefield. That happens with a man named Ned Griffin. At the bottom of the screen, you're going to see a snippet of text. I'm sorry if it's a little small to read. That is the petition for his freedom. He was actually drafted as a substitute for a man named William Kitchen, who did not want to serve. And William Kitchen falsely promised him his freedom. So he had to actually petition the North Carolina General Assembly after the war, proving his service, proving what was said, and he was able to obtain his freedom.
The white courts would have led to a lot of erasure occurring throughout all of these battles. How often do you find any new information about a African American or an indigenous person or another kind of person participating in the battles after that erasure occurs?
Sometimes it comes from their descendants themselves. Sometimes it comes from looking at new research that historians have done. Luckily, with the digital age, we are able to mine digitized archives, and historians have to look for keywords that describe African Americans at this time. For example, we actually had a visitor yesterday who is currently in service, and he told us how his grandmother had told him that his ancestor fought with the 1st Maryland. Mm-hmm. And we do know that the 1st Maryland had a bit of a higher, well, the Maryland Continentals as a whole had more of an integrated army than some of the other states at this time. So he could not remember the name of his ancestor, but it's really interesting to see somebody have that connection to the past and try to help us find that information so that we can share it with the public.
Absolutely. We have a few questions from the audience. If you have questions right now for Ranger Rebecca, please put them into the Q&A, and I will try to get to every single one that we can. One is coming from Joanna Foley, who I know also has some ancestors in the park. She is asking how many of the men buried or reburied at Guilford National Military Park actually fought in the battle?
Oh, that's a great question. So when our park was founded, and this is before it was a national park, the original person who saved the battlefield, David Shank, was interested in actually making this park a revolutionary kind of battleground cemetery. This is during the late 1800s, where people have different ideas of commemoration. For example, there used to be a formal English garden in front of the General Greene Monument. But some of the people who are buried at the park did fight in the Revolution, but did not fight with us. So, for example, if you go to the Sumter Monument, he did not fight at the park, at the Battle of Guilford Courthouse. And then there's actually 2 signers of the Declaration who are buried at the site, but they did not set foot here at the battle. So that's why it's interesting to talk to the Rangers when you have these questions about, why are there people buried here? But as far as the actual soldiers who may have been buried on the battlefield, we're actually not sure where their graves are located.
And that's actually one of the park mysteries, right? There is supposed to be a mass burial somewhere on those grounds, and it has never been found. If that's correct?
That's correct. Yes, that would take a lot of archaeology to be able to achieve. So
we have another question. Did Greene go on? Oh, this is a great question. I love this question. Did Greene go on to join with Washington at Yorktown, or did he take his army back down south to Savannah?
So he actually moved his army further south because he was trying to rout out the other British groups that were down there. That is a great question. It's actually Lord Cornwallis who goes to Wilmington to resupply and then moves north to Yorktown. So no, he does not rejoin with Washington.
He's not yet at Yorktown. He does go into another couple of really big battles though.
Yes, he does. So, and we have his battles listed on the side of his monument.
Another question, we had a question that was sent in early to us about genealogy. And just as a general statement about looking at genealogy, Ranger Barefoot, what would you like to tell everybody about that?
So we do have the names of participants on the American, British, and Hessian side. We have been very fortunate to have wonderful volunteers track down this information, which has taken years. It took 2 years, for example, to track down the British and Hessian side from one of our volunteers. Therefore, we mainly focus our records only on the people who fought at the battle, not their descendants. But we do have questions from descendants about who was involved, and we're able to look at our records. But we do want to let you know that, unfortunately, Revolutionary War records will never be complete. That's the issue with archives of the day. Things were set on fire, things were lost to water, things were just lost to time. So unfortunately, there's always going to be gaps in the records, but we do have some resources to help you track down your ancestor who may or may not have been here. But there are also a lot of other resources out there. For example, the Daughters of the American Revolution have a website that you can look at their open access. Of course, many people turn to Ancestry as well as the National Archives. So if you have questions, we can try to do our best, but unfortunately we do not track the entire actual genealogy of the soldiers themselves.
I'm sad to say we have 2 really good questions actually right after this. One more pertains to the battle, so I'm actually going to ask that question, which is, and I know that Ranger Barefoot actually likes talking about this, is there any new information on the so-called Guilford Courthouse militia flag lately?
Is there any new information? Not that we're aware of. So the militia flag, kind of has an interesting history because, there's no photos of the battle. Photography wasn't until, the Civil War era. So we have to rely on people's stories saying that there was a Guilford militia flag there. But different groups in battle use flags so that way you can see where your regiment is. I mean, that's why we have such brightly colored uniforms. That's why we have these flags. So in a field of smoke, confusion, you can look and say, there's my group. I'm not separated. So there's that other group that I don't want to be near. So.
And also, just as a general answer, if you are ever interested in genealogy and you live in Guilford County, please come by the Greensboro Public Library. We actually have dedicated librarian genealogists who will help you with that, figuring out descendants and ancestors of figures that you think might be connected to you. There are a number of other resources too that have many listings of possible patriots or British soldiers that participated in these battles. I believe I'm about to get the name wrong. What is it? There's
Fold 3, and there's also a great website called Rev War Apps. That is transcriptions of pension applications from the National Archives done by historians.
We're going to have to close now. I know there are some very lovely questions about General Greene himself, but we are really going to focus more on the Battle of Guilford Courthouse itself right now. If you have questions about General Greene as the individual, please go by the park and talk to the Rangers.
Yes.
I know that they have done a lot of research on Major General Greene.
We have.
And he lived a very interesting life.
He did. And also, even though our anniversary is mainly digital, we still invite you to come by the park. We will be out in the park. We are excited to talk to you about the battle and give you some insight even more into various types of soldiers that fought there. So check out our Facebook events and follow us on Facebook. And not only will you see that history leading up to the battle, but we've got a lot more in store for you that we couldn't share today.
You can also come to the Greensboro History Museum to learn about some of the things, but we do not go as in depth into the Revolutionary War battles as the National Park does. But we are going to have another history lunch break next week. So join us again next Friday at 12 for History Lunch Break. Ella Baker, 6 Decades in the Making, with our guest, Dr. Leah Williams. We also have another Greensboro History Museum education webinar coming up this Tuesday, March 16th at 6 p.m. This particular webinar will actually be talking with a refugee who works now at the Center for New North Carolinians, and she'll be discussing the overall refugee experience of those who live in Guilford County. If you want to register for any of our webinars, History Lunch Break or the Education webinars, go to our website, www.greensborohistory.org. Ranger Rebecca, thank you so much for being here with us today. We are going to close it up, and I hope that everybody has a wonderful rest of your day. Enjoy the beautiful afternoon.
Yep. Thanks, everybody. We hope to see you at the park. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.